Hi everyone, my name is Shazia Khan, and today's unit that we'll be doing is to Unit 4, which is communication skills in a business. So looking at the unit spec for this firstly. So we've got learning outcomes to go through. So there's 5 learning outcomes and then an assignment discussion session. Okay, so we'll go through each one briefly so you've got a little bit of an idea, and then each day we'll do each learning outcome and then an assignment discussion. Okay, so learning outcome 1 is to understand how internal communication takes place within organizations. Unit 2, learning outcome 2 is to understand how organizations communicate with customers. Learning outcome 3 is to understand the factors that impact on effectiveness of communications in business. And learning outcome 4 is to present an oral information effectively. And then the final learning outcome, which is learning outcome 5, is to communicate effectively in writing. So the elements of this we'll be going through each week, so you've got a better idea of what we're doing and what the indicative content is for each unit. So that's a little bit on the unit specification. So I'm just going to go through first learning outcome with you, okay? So I'll just bring that up.
Yeah.
And it's on communication, so it's quite an interesting area to look at in regards to communication skills for businesses. So can you see this now, Olu?
Yeah, I can see it.
Excellent. So when we talk about communication, why do you think it's so important for any organization?
Because if there's no communication, the business can't really move forward.
Yes.
Ideas need to be shared, and it just needs you need to communicate to actually move forward with your business, both internally and externally.
Yes. So, like you said, internally and externally, communication is really important. The first learning outcome we need to go through is to understand how internal communication takes place within an organization, why it's so important, why there's an element of why we need internal communication and why there's a need for it in any business, okay?
Yeah.
So, firstly, the unit aim is to develop your knowledge and understanding of communication practices within organizations, and learners are introduced to the different modes and channels of communication used in organizations. In addition, learners will be able to develop their communication skills, and learners will also apply their own communication skills to typical organizational requirements. So the learning outcome 1, indicative content. So we look at understanding how internal communication takes place within any organization. So we look at the process of communication, why it's so important. So it's there to provide information, like you said, Olu, to gain information, understanding, and to generate ideas, to team cohesion, to send information vertically, so upward and downward and horizontally, to provide information formally and informally. It's a dynamic process, and the sender has an idea. The idea message is sent and the message is transmitted to the receiver. Receiver gets message and then receiver gives feedback. Modes of communication, which we'll be looking at, things like written, letters, newsletters, updates, face-to-face oral briefings we'll be looking at. Electronic forms of communication, things like email, Facebook, and that is quite widely used nowadays. I think it's more electronic than anything else, because people prefer that form of communication. Conferences and training events and webinars. We'll also be looking at barriers to communication. So things like, technological barriers, it might be personal barriers, non-verbal communication, the fact that people can't maybe read the language, the tone, how a message is portrayed can be a barrier to communication. Legal and ethical issues, things like the legislation, GDPR, freedom of information, equality, and ethical issues such as use of email, whistleblowing, and organizational policies. Now, it's really important to follow the policies in an organization. Why do you think it's so key, if you work for an organization, to follow the policy?
Because the policy is there to help the organization. It is
Yes.
supposed to be followed so you can have smooth and effective business.
Yes, so and it's a requirement, isn't it? If you work for an organization, you must follow the policies that are in place. Key terminology.
Yeah.
So we need to start off with what is the definition of communication. So it's a transfer of information from one person, a group of people, to another by writing, speaking. There's different means which we'll be looking at different modes of communication. Internal communication is the process defined of aligning employees to employee strategy by systematically informing, influencing, and motivating and engaging people. There's several types of communication which we mentioned, verbal, non-verbal, written and visual. People learn differently. You may be different to how I learn, and I may be different to how you learn. So, it's how people communicate with each other. I prefer, in a way, face-to-face sessions sometimes, because I feel like, if I'm doing a training course, I would prefer it face-to-face. Some people prefer webinars and online, so everyone's different.
Yeah.
There's a video there. What kind of communication do you prefer, Olu? Do you prefer online or do you prefer face-to-face?
I think I can do both, but online is easier and faster for me personally.
I think more of the younger generation prefer online.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the older generation, my generation, prefer probably face-to-face and letters and things like that.
Yeah.
So there's a video there that you can watch in your own time, and this video is on looking at how to improve internal communication in your company, and it's a video about a company and how you improve internal communication. So you can watch that in your own time.
Okay.
So learning outcome 1, LO1, is to understand how internal communication takes place. So internal communication is really important to ensure any sort of clarity. Okay, we've got make sure that the communication is effectively communicated between the organisation. The different forms of communication, and there can be challenges, to this communication as well. Internal communication is the share of information that supports employees in doing their job. Okay, it keeps everyone on the same page, and it keeps everyone to provide a solid kind of stream of information. If you're working in an organization, you want to be at the same level as the other people in that organization, so you're able to understand how information is shared. It could be shared from various channels, and you should be able to understand that, and it's really important part of any organizational culture, learning culture, and you're making sure that you implement any sort of information across to the next party. So there are theoretical frameworks of communication models. There are models in place, and these models are in place to they're different models, and there's different reasons for why they have been adopted in regards to communication, and we're going to look at the models a little bit in detail. Okay, so the first one is the communication model, and it was by someone called Shannon and Weaver in 1949, and it was an American mathematician called Claude Shannon and Warren Weaver, and they conceived the model at that time. And the model was developed to represent the basic elements of communication and how messages can become lost or distorted. And Shannon and Weaver actually believed that by identifying barriers to communication, you could develop strategies to overcome them. So, they looked at the fact that, there are barriers to communication, be it language, be it technology. If you were able to identify them barriers, you could overcome them barriers as well. So this was quite a good model that was used by Shannon and Weaver at that time. So the model breaks down effective communication in 5 elements. So they looked at the source, who was the person who decides and creates the message. Then the second element is the transmitter, who is the element that translates the message into signal. Then you have channel, is the way the signal is delivered or carried out. And then the receiver is the part of that translates the signal back into the message. And the final one of the 5 elements is destination, the person the message was intended for. You know, sometimes when you think about communication, it's quite hard to identify, you know, basic forms of communication, but this model is quite clear, and it identifies the channels of communication. So then we had the transactional model, which is a theory that describes communication as a dynamic process, and this was proposed by Barnlund in 1970. And this process is where both the sender and the receiver of a message are simultaneously encoding and decoding information while engaging in feedback loops. And this model is viewed as a two-way model, two-way process, where both the sender and receiver of a message are considered to be the main active participants in the communication process. So it's a two-way process. Then we went on to the organizational communication theories, and this was White sense-making theory. And this was there to look at human interactions and information processing as the central activities of organization. It's in fact a theory that represents communication interactions and collective information processing as the primary element of social organization. So it looks at the element of you know, trying to identify, interpret, giving through their experiences and their interactions. And then we have the structuration theory, which is by Giddens, and this is a theory of social action, which claims that society should be understood in terms of action and structure. So rather than two separate entities. So, you know, it looked at the social structure side of it. So these are some of the theories around communication. Then we're going to look at now the mechanisms of internal communication. So we have formal communication channels, we have informal communication networks, and we have communication technologies. And we'll go through each one so you've got a better idea of what each element means. So formal communication typically refers to an official interchange of information, okay? Regardless of your role within an organization, knowing how to formally communicate and recognize formal communication can help improve the way you communicate with colleagues and the company's management. So is this more of a professional kind of way of communicating? What do you think, formal communication?
Is this communication just for internal, or is it like external? Like, is it just like for the people in the company that are
Yes, yes.
communicating? Okay.
Yeah.
Well, formal communication could be like,
so it's kind of, yeah, it's, you know, it's a way that it's different formal communications and tips are used to identify formal ways of communication. And it could be things like meetings, emails, newsletters, memos, and it's an exchange of information, and it's official information between people within the same organization, maybe at different levels. So it could be manager, you know, it could be you, and it follows this chain of communication from high-ranking employees down to the lower level individuals. So it's more formal.
yeah.
More formal is, you know, it's not like maybe outside, you know. So, you know, formal is more professional. And there are 4 types of
how they communicate the important stuff.
Yes. Yeah, I think sometimes in a formal setting, you've got to watch how you talk, don't you, and how you communicate.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. And it's sometimes you want to bite your tongue and say something else, but sometimes you can't.
You have
So,
to
you know,
remember.
yes, there's 4 major ways in organizations that use formal communication. And first one is downward communication. And this is the most common form of formal communication and represents the flow of information from the company's management to the lower level, so to the subordinates. It could be through emails, it could be through memos, manuals, it could be through any sort of reports. Another formal communication is upward communication, and this is the opposite of downward communication, and therefore represents the messages passed from subordinates from lower down to the management. And it could take in forms of requests, reports, it could be any sort of complaints or anything like that. Then we have another form which is horizontal, and this is also known as lateral communication. And this type of formal communication takes place between co-workers who have different roles but are at the same hierarchical level within an organisation. And then the final one is diagonal communication, also known as crosswise communication. And this is where the employees who work for different departments within the same organisation and are also on different hierarchical levels formally communicate with each other. It's usually consists of employees communicating with managers. It might be HR department, it might be the marketing or finance department.
Okay,
So then
and all these things are still under formal communication, right?
Yeah. Sorry,
Okay,
what was that?
Are all these things still under formal communication?
Yes, yeah. So they're all parts of formal communication, different 4 types, okay? Then we've got the informal communication, and that is in the workplace. It refers to exchanging of information outside of formal channels, such as it might be memos, scheduled meetings. It can take the form of, you and me maybe working for the same organization and having a casual conversation. It could be, casual conversation between your co-worker. It could be social media interactions. It could be any sort of discussions. That's informal. It's more casual, isn't it? And it is unofficial in nature. It's based on informal social relationships in a workplace outside of the normal. Would you talk in an informal manner to the CEO? Olu, can you hear me? So this informal communication is important in the workplace, as it can help with employee morale and can encourage the feelings of belonging for the employees as well as client or a customer. So then we have communication technologies, and also this is known as information technologies, and it refers to the equipment and programs that are used to process communication, such as intranets, collaboration tools. It may be video conferencing, things like Zoom, Microsoft Teams, social media, and it's a way of connecting in real life communication. Communication technology refers to equipment. Professionals in communication technology fields specialize in development, and it may be that you maybe use that form of communication within your organization to have meetings or maybe appraisals, or it may be that you have intranet where you find all the tools, and a Microsoft Teams. So this is a communication of technology. Practices for effective internal communication. So you've got leadership communication, and this is effective internal communication often begins with the leadership, which is the leaders on top. They communicate their goals, their vision and changes and consistency, and transparency and open leadership fosters any sort of trust and alignment. Employee involvement and feedback. Engaging with employees is really important, and in any sort of decision-making situation. So you get the employees involved, and they feel that they have, they are part of the organisation. Also, such mechanisms would be things like surveys or suggestion boxes, and regular town hall meetings can provide employees with a voice. So it's really important. Training and development, another really important element of any organisation. They should invest in any sort of CPD training, essential training on conflict resolution, customer interactions, And then finally, cultural considerations should be sensitive to cultural diversity within an organisation, because, you know, understanding and respecting everyone's culture and being diverse and enhancing inclusivity, it reduces any sort of misunderstandings and any sort of conflict. So, you know, you must respect cultural considerations. And in conclusion, internal communication with organisations is a multifaceted process that can encompass various theoretical perspectives, mechanisms and practices. Effective internal communication is essential for fostering a cohesive organisational culture, enhancing employee engagement and ensuring operational efficiency. By utilising appropriate communication models, leveraging both formal and informal channels, and adopting best practices in leadership and employee engagement, organisation can significantly improve their internal communication strategies. So these are the references for the first part of Learning Outcome 1. And we're moving on to 1.1 now, which is to explain the process of internal communication within organisations. So internal communication is an interdisciplinary process of promoting effective communications within organisations. It's how you produce and deliver content to your team, and the proverbial office memo is basic and poor example of communication system, but you can and should go a lot further to identify some elements. So you're exchanging information within your team, and you have ideas and information that are exchanged, and the process is broken into several stages that you can look at in regards to that. So the first stages of internal communication is the sender, which is number 1. So the process, as we mentioned earlier, begins with the sender, who is responsible for creating and encoding the message. The sender could be an individual or group, such as a manager, team leader, or communication department, who will process, who's responsible for creating and encoding the message. Then you have the second stage, which is encoding. So this involves translating a message into symbols, language or gestures, so it could be understood by the receiver. And the way you do this is you try to include things like appropriate words, the tone and the medium of communication when you're sending this message. The channel number 3 is the medium through which the message is transmitted. So it could be verbally, it could be emails, it could be written, it could be digital through collaboration tools. It's how you portray the message across and through which channel. Number 4 is the receiver, is the individual or group to whom the message is directed, and the receiver's role is to interpret or decode the message accurately. Decoding, number 5. Decoding is the process by which the receiver interprets and understands the message. Effective decoding depends on the receiver's knowledge and experience and context. So how it is sent, how it is decoded, and how the person understands the message. Then number 6 is feedback. Feedback is a response from the receiver back to the sender. It indicates whether the message was understood as intended and allows for clarification if needed. Feedback can be immediate or delayed depending on the communication channel. And number 7 is noise. Noise refers to the interference that may distort or hinder the communication process. This can be physical, maybe background noise. It could be prejudice, emotions, or semantic words. So the language barriers, the jargon used may not be understood, or maybe it needs clarification. So components of effective communication. Number 1 is really important: clarity and consistencies. Messages should be clear and not and consistent to avoid any sort of misunderstanding within the receiver or the sender. They need to be clear. They should be relevant and timeliness. So information should be relevant to the audience, delivered in a timely manner, and engagement and participation. So encouraging active engagement and participation from employees fosters a collaborative environment. Mechanisms for feedback and dialogue are essential. Number 4, appropriate channels. So choosing the right channel based on the message and audience is crucial. For instance, complex messages may require face-to-face meetings, while routine updates can be shared by email. So you need to look at the organisation, the setting you're in, how you want to portray the information to the individual, and whether it can be done face-to-face rather than via email, or via email rather than face-to-face. Cultural sensitivity, so understanding and respecting cultural differences within organisations ensures that the communication that's coming across is inclusive and effective to all employees. So we have a summary table here, which looks at the element of the stage. So you have the send, the description, and the key consideration. So you have the sender, and the description is that they initiate the communication by creating a message, and the key consideration is that it must be clear about the message intent. Then the encoding stage translates the message into understandable symbols or language, and then the key consideration, choose appropriate language and symbols. So the person is able to understand what you are writing, and you need to make sure that you are using language that is understandable. Then the channel stage is the medium through which the message is transmitted. Key consideration, select suitable channels such as verbal, written, digital, face-to-face. Then the next stage is the receiver. So the individual or group who receives the message and ensure the receiver is correctly identified. The decoding stage is the receiver interprets the message, and then the key consideration, the receiver's background, context, and experience are crucial. And the feedback stage is response from the receiver back to the sender, and the key consideration is allows for clarification and ensures understanding. And then the noise is any interference that distorts the message, and then the key consideration is to minimize any sort of physical, psychological, and somatic barriers. So this table identifies different stages with the description and key considerations. So in conclusion, the process of internal communication within an organisation involves several critical stages, from the creation and encoding of the message by the sender to the decoder and feedback by the receiver. Effective internal communication requires clarity, relevance, appropriate channel selection, and cultural sensitivity. And by understanding and managing these stages and components, organisations can enhance their internal communication processes, leading to improved collaboration, efficiency, and organisational cohesion. So these are the references used for the element of looking at different stages of communication. Shannon, Week, and Barland. Now we're going to go on to 1.2, which is to assess the appropriate use of different internal modes of communication for different purposes. So assessment of appropriate use of communication, so internal and external communication are terms to describe aspects of a business. Effective communication improves business efficiency. So the exchange of information between groups or individuals, either within a business or outside of the business, is really important, and how you deal with that ensures that the message is being delivered accurately and effectively. So the different modes of communication within an organisation. And the first one is, there's 3 modes of it, which is known as imperative communication, presentational communication, and interpersonal communication. And we'll go through each one with reference to different types of communication. So imperative communication involves information being received and interpreted by a receiving party without any additional information provided by the speaker, while presentational communication do not allow the speaker to interact with the audience or obtain feedback at all. Both are forms of one-way communication, whereas you've got interpersonal communication is a two-way form of communication that takes place most regularly through simple conversation with the parties. So there are different modes of communication that we're going to go through. And the first one is written communication. And written and oral communication are two ways humans communicate with each other. They're essential they are an essential skill in society. We need to live in a society with others, so we need to communicate. And written communication is the exchange of information, ideas, or messages through written language. And it could be, as we mentioned, letters, which are formal, often used for official communications, such as employment contracts, policy changes. And then we've got written communication bulletins, notice boards, updates, and these are general announcements for the public or employees, ensuring everyone is aware of certain policies, maybe, or consistencies within the workplace. And newsletters are used to keep employees informed about organisational developments, any sort of achievements, any sort of trying to build a community and keep everyone engaged within the organisation. Written communication is used worldwide in various forms, as we mentioned: letters, email, blogs, instant messaging, books, newspapers. Writing has become an intrinsic part of humanity and history over the millennium. So people tend to use it where they feel like they're able to get their messages across. The next one is face-to-face communication. Another important element of this face-to-face communication is when two or more people see and physically interact with each other. And it's also known as personal communication. They share thoughts and information with their colleagues. It may be personal communication, and it allows the receiver to read non-verbal cues such as the body language, tone of the voice, facial expression, and it's a way of interacting with colleagues, customers, and in the best manner possible. And a form of face-to-face or oral communication, things like briefings, meetings where essential information is communicated quickly and effectively. Appraisals are one-to-one meetings between a supervisor and an employee to discuss performance, maybe their personal goals. It may be provide feedback. So that's a form of face-to-face communication. And you've got daily, weekly hurdles. These are regular meetings aimed at ensuring team alignment, discussing immediate tasks, and addressing issues promptly. And they foster this team cohesion and ensure everyone is on the same page and know the same things. Department meetings, these are more comprehensive than hurdles and used for discussing issues such as maybe strategic planning, problem solving. And then interviews and disciplinaries meetings, recruitment, disciplinary, anything to do with sensitive discussion that require confidentiality. Other elements, other examples could be things like annual staff meetings with management, sales meetings with prospective clients, social gatherings with other colleagues, and meetings, like we mentioned, with managers. Then we've got electronic communication, and electronic communication is the exchange of digital messages and data over a network or through other electronic means. Digital communication provides a wide range of uses, from business and personal to educational and recreational. And, we've got things like emails. So this is one of the most popular forms of electronic communication. And it allows users to send written messages with attachments, such as maybe images or documents, to another's email address or group mailing. And it's really quickly and easily displayed. And it's an important way to keep informed about any sort of different tasks that are being done or any sort of events. And it can be utilised to receive notices from online services, maybe social media networks, banking sites. And the next one is social media, which is Facebook and Twitter. It could be WhatsApp. It could be any element of that. And that could be things like, trying to engage through that form of communication. Blogs and intranet are suitable for thought leadership, sharing insights and detailed updates. Intranets, instant messaging apps, and another type of electronic communication that allow users to send real-time text messages back and forth between two people or even within larger groups. So as we mentioned, social media, FaceTime, Skype, Telegram, these are different features and platforms. And you know, with instant messaging, users are at a risk of revealing sensitive or confidential information over an unsecured delivery channel. So it's one that's quite difficult sometimes. Another one is video conferencing, so which enable geographically dispersed participants to bridge the distance between them and connect virtually face-to-face using webcams, microphones for interactive experience like on a real-life screen. And then Yammer and Skype, things as we mentioned, social media networks are considered a big part and is a growing thing, since they enable people from all over the globe to connect via posts, comments, likes and shares, you know. So the popular ones, you know, is organizations will use, and it may be a group thing that they can protect, have security on, but it may be something that's, you know, gets them, make sure that there's lots of privacy involved in it as well and it's protected. If you think about an organization, they allow their employees to engage with customers over social media channels. Monitoring the activity is an evolving challenge for any company. Unmonitored social media posts or improper digital communications can trigger regulatory sanctions, fines or litigation, not to mention reputational damage to the company brand. In turn, it becomes increasingly crucial for companies to integrate defensible compliance strategies, you know, to make sure that you are following the guidelines as well. Text messaging is another form, which is a form of electronic communication that allows users to quickly and easily send short messages via their phones or other mobile devices. It's one of the most widely used forms of digital communication for both personal and business purposes, making it an invaluable tool for staying connected with colleagues, friends and family. But, you know, there are risks of that, you know, whether the device is stolen or lost and someone can access all the conversations. So there are risks around that. Conference, which is things like, you know, the whole staff are used, announcements and strategic planning, organizational updates. They're effective for aligning the entire organization, making sure that, you know, they align and they're in tune with everything and everyone knows what they're doing. Training events and webinars, and these are events for skill development and professional growth. They provide hands-on experience and opportunities for interaction. So it's really important to interact with others, networking and getting feedback as well. Webinars are effective for remote training, and they're widely used a lot now, webinars. You know, and that is really important in organizations if their employees are not able to go out and get face-to-face training. They allow for interactive sessions with a wider audience, facilitating learning and engagement from different locations. So we've got a summary table here with the different modes of communication and the appropriate use. So we've got written, letters for formal communication and legal documents, bulletins, notice boards, general announcements, policy updates, newsletters, organizational developments, employee engagement, face-to-face and oral. Obviously, they're used for interaction with each other. Briefings, quick updates, emergency information, appraisals, the appropriate uses for performance reviews, goal settings, daily, weekly hurdles, team alignment, immediate task discussions, departmental team meetings, so for strategic planning, problem solving, interviews and disciplinary, so recruitment, sensitive discussions, electronic, could be emails and things like that. Electronic form could be social media, employee engagement, informal updates, blogs and intranets, as we went through different websites, could be forms of Yammer, Skype, Facebook, collaborating ideas, collaborative real-time communication, virtual meetings, conference halls, staff meetings, major announcements, training webinars, training events, skill development, onboarding and webinars to remote training and knowledge. So in conclusion, the appropriate use of different internal modes of communication is essential for achieving various organizational purposes. By selecting the right mode for each context, whether it is written face-to-face, electronic, or through large meetings and training events, organizations can ensure that their messages are effectively conveyed and understood, fostering better engagement, efficiency, and alignment across the organization. Electronic communication is essential in today's digital world, but it carries risks that must be managed. Therefore, identifying any sort of digital hazards of digital communication is imperative for any organization to maintain any sort of data security. So these are the reference for looking at modes of communication. Now we're going on to 1.3, which is looking at analysing barriers to effective communication within organisations. So there are barriers within organisations when it comes to any sort of communication, and that come across. There are multiple barriers. There are several distortions and disturbances that leads to misunderstanding, as well as failure of business communication and the different types of barriers of business communication. For instance, it could be things like emotional, psychological, physical, cultural, etc. The first one is barriers to communication is the clarity or written oral messages, the readability. So messages are difficult to read due to complex, language. Language is a big thing, or poor structure can lead to misunderstandings. Written communications must be clear, concise, well organized, and easy to understand, and ensure the message is being able to understood. Language barriers play a big part as well, so that the person is able to understand. And linguistic barriers, one can consider the language of different regions as well, can lead to ineffective barriers of communication. The dialects of every two regions keep changing with every few kilometers. So in the workplace, different employees will have different linguistic skills, and this affects the operation of an organization. The tone as well, the tone of the message, whether written or oral, can significantly affect how it is received. A tone that is perceived as aggressive, condescending, or overly casual can create resistance and hinder effective communication. So we've got clarity of written and oral messages. So messages that are difficult to read due to the complex jargon, as we mentioned, and the language barriers as well. That's a big part of it, that we're able to communicate messages that are understood. You have barriers in place to try to remove these kind of barriers as well. Non-verbal communication, so that's things like misrepresentation of body language, non-verbal cues such as facial expressions, gestures and posture play a significant role in communication. Misinterpretation of these cues can lead to misunderstanding. Misrepresentation can lead to, especially in cross-cultural settings where emotional non-verbal cues may vary. Lack of feedback, non-verbal feedback. So in virtual communication, the absence of non-verbal feedback can make it difficult to gauge. So, there's elements of that in regards to it. So there are different barriers in place. There's also things like emotional barriers, which is a person with strong emotions will be able to communicate effectively as compared to a person who's not mature emotionally. So there should be a perfect blend of emotions to facilitate efficient business communications. Like we mentioned, emotions like anger, frustration, jealousy can limit the decision-making capacity of a person. Another one to mention is the psychological barriers. Psychological and mental issues are also barriers to efficient communication. Speech disorders, stage fears, depression, phobia, etc. can degrade the quality of business communication. And we looked a little bit at the cultural barriers as well, such as, it's normal to have people from different cultural worlds parts of the world, and they differ in different places, the way they dress, the food they eat, the religion. You know, it's really important to take on board the cultural factors to facilitate any sort of effective communication. Physical barriers can be, such barriers include closed doors, faulty equipment, noise, closed cabins. Such physical barriers can ruin business communication. Organizational barriers, because of multiple organizational structures in an enterprise, organizational barriers, different structures can give misinformation, miscommunication, or lack of transparency. Perception barriers, so people tend to perceive things differently. There's an essential that you take into consideration the consideration of the perception of others and think from their perspective as well. Another element is technological barriers, which is evolving every day and is necessary to keep up with technology, which we mentioned is in that summary as well, in this summary table, which we'll go through. So I'll just go through the summary table. So the barrier is clarity of written oral message readability. The description is complex language, poor structure. The impact on communication leads to misunderstandings. Language barrier, as we mentioned, different languages and proficiency levels, and it causes misinterpretation and confusion. So, you know, people are from different areas of the world, so language will play a big element of it. The tone as well is really important. The description, if you're condescending, casual tone, aggressive, it creates this resistance and hinders any sort of effective barrier. Technology, like we looked at, is poor connection, so technical issues disrupting communication, and the impact is it interrupts virtual meetings and remote working communication. And you know, technology, advancement often increases the cost of business operations, so technological barriers need to be taken to form. Inappropriate use, so wrong technology or context, delays responses and causes misunderstanding. Interpersonal relations, so personal conflicts or hostile due to personal animosities, and the impact on communication, it hampers open and honest communication. Non-verbal communication, so misrepresentation of body language, you know, the way you stand, the way you talk, incorrect description, incorrect interpretation of non-verbal cues, and it leads to misunderstanding, and especially cross-culturally. Maybe when you shake someone's hand or how you do things, your body language is misinterpreted. Lack of non-verbal or feedback, absence of visual cues in virtual communication, and the impact is that it results in lack of engagement and misrepresentation. So in conclusion, various barriers can impede effective communication within an organisation, including clarity of the message that comes across. It may be technological issues, non-verbal issues, it may be perception barriers. These barriers do impact on, the way things are communicated. It's necessary to try to overcome these barriers by implementing things into place to try to better collaborate and organise things so that people are able to understand and collaborate effectively with each other. References for barriers to communication. Then we've got 1M1, which is to analyse the legal and ethical issues in relation to the communication of information within organisations. So security issues are a big thing and are raised by data disappearance within any organisation. So it's effectively transmitted. The legal and ethical issues surrounding organisational communication are crucial for ensuring any sort of transparency, protecting personal data and promoting equality. So we're going to look at the legislation in regards to this and provide a summary table. So the first one is the Freedom of Information Act, FOIA in 2000. The Act provides individuals and organisations with the right to request information held by public authority. The public authority must tell the applicant whether it holds information. It must within 20 working days. There are some exceptions to this Act. For example, if the cost of a request for information exceeds its appropriate limit, the public authority may decide to decline the request because they might opt to serve a greater public interest. If there's a dispute, the Commissioner's office may investigate and deem whether the information should be released or not. And there are, elements that the organisations need to take into account when looking at implications for communication through this Information Act and ethical considerations. General Data Regulations, GDPR, which is really important for any business or any organisation. Businesses store information about people inside their organisation. The data protects the information held about other people from being misused and is stored to obtained fairly and lawfully. It's used only for the purposes of stating during collection. The Act, is important because it keeps everyone's information accurate and up to date, but it's protected as well. Making sure that there's no misuse of information. The implications for the general data protection for communication is that organisation or businesses must ensure that any personal data communicated internally or externally is handled in compliance with GDPR, which is the General Data Protection Regulations. This includes obtaining consent, ensuring data accuracy, implementing measures to protect data from any sort of breaches. The ethical consideration is that ethically organisations must respect individuals' privacy and handle personal data with integrity. Misuse or mishandling of personal data can lead to significant loss or harm to the individual. So they, must make sure that the information that they handle is, is protected because it's the individual's personal data, and the organisation or business must make sure that they are following the regulations and the laws in regarding to protecting individuals' privacy. Then we've got the equality legislation, really important legislation in regards to eliminating any sort of discrimination and equality in the workplace. It covers things like characteristics, including age, the disability, gender reassignment, race, religion or belief, sex and sexual orientation. And it's really important part of the equality legislation in any organisation and any business dealing with employees. Implications for communication. Communication within organisations must be inclusive and free from discrimination. And this includes language that is respectful and non-discriminatory. So, take on board that the language you use is not discriminating against anyone or is respectful to that person, and ensuring that communication methods are accessible to all employees. Ethical considerations. So ethically, organisations should foster a culture of inclusion and respect. This involves actively promoting diversity and ensuring that all employees feel valued and heard. So it's really important that ethical issues are taken into account when we're looking at the element of any sort of communication within an organisation. So there's a summary table here in regards to the legislation, the key provisions, implications for communication and ethical consideration, which we've gone through a little bit. So we've looked at the Freedom of Information Act, Nice. I'm sorry, I was just went off, but I'm back now. So in conclusion, to looking at the legislation around it, legal and ethical considerations are paramount in communication of information within organisations. Adhering to legislation such as the Freedom of Information Act, GDPR and quality laws ensure communication practices are transparent, respectful of privacy and inclusive. Ethically, organisations must strive to balance transparency with confidentiality, protect personal data, and promote equality to maintain trust and integrity. So we've finished learning outcome 1 now, and these are some of the resources we've used for learning outcome 1 to finish off learning outcome 1. And these are information commissioners, and the links are there, European Union, and the links are there for you, and UK Government on Equality Act. So just to give you a summary of what we've done in learning outcome 1, we've looked at understanding how internal communication takes place within an organisation. We've looked at internal communication, the purpose of internal communication, the different types of internal communication. We looked at the theories around internal communication, such as communication models, the Shannon and Weaver model, Barland's transactional model of communication. We then went on to look at the mechanisms of internal communication, such as formal communication channels, informal communication channels, and looked at elements of communication technologies. We then went on to look at explaining the process for internal communication within organisations, and looked at assessing the appropriate use of different internal modes of communication for different purposes. We looked at different modes of communication, such as the element of written communication, face-to-face communication, which is also referred to as oral communication, electronic communication, emails, digital messages. We also then went on to look at the elements of the barriers to communication, effective barriers, and we also looked at the legislation around communication, such as the Equality Act, the GDPR, and the Information Act as well. So we've finished learning outcome 1 now. If you've got any questions or anything, to email learnerwork@ukvarsity.co.uk. This ebooks and journals on Moodle that you need to refer to for extra reading. Further reading, I've got a link on there, which is a PDF document on effective internal communications that you can read up in your own time. Any queries or questions, email learnerwork@ukvarsity.co.uk. Submission of the assignment is to be done on learnerwork@ukvarsity.co.uk, and it's 2 weeks after the completion of the unit. We've now finished learning outcome 1. The next learning outcome would be learning outcome 2, which will I will see you in the next couple of days. Thank you for attending this session, and if you have any queries or any questions, please email learnerwork@ukvarsity.co.uk. Thank you for attending the session. Thank you.